At 54, Sloane Marchetti discovered that being erased from a company hurt less than the moment she realized she had nowhere left in the world to drive to. After 28 years of loyalty, a quiet email and a cardboard box ended her career on a Tuesday afternoon, and within 6 months, the silence in her apartment was louder than any goodbye. Her savings were gone, drained caring for a dying father no one else would visit. Her marriage had collapsed years before. Her only son hadn't returned a call in 14 months. Tucked deep in her glove compartment was the one thing she had left, a hand-drawn map and a heavy iron key on a leather cord her grandfather Tate had pressed in her palm when she was 9 years old, whispering, "Sloane, when the world finally takes everything from you, drive to the cabin. But don't open what's behind the stove until you've got nothing left to lose." 26 years after his death, exhausted, hands raw from gripping the steering wheel through a Montana blizzard, Sloane finally turned onto the logging road that led to her grandfather's hunting cabin, a place the rest of her family had written off as condemned. Stay until the end, because when she rounded the last bend through the pines, what she saw made her slam the brakes so hard the truck slid sideways in the snow. The door was already open. Smoke was rising from a chimney that should have been cold for 14 years. And what she eventually found hidden behind that cast-iron stove would not just save her life. It would force her to question everything she thought she knew about the man who raised her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Tuesday it ended, Sloane wore the navy blazer her grandfather had bought her the day she got the job. She didn't do it on purpose. She just grabbed it off the hook the way she had 1,000 other mornings. By 11:14 a.m., she was sitting across from a man named Mr. Lindgren who couldn't quite look at her, listening to him use the word restructuring for different ways. By 11:32, she was carrying a cardboard box across the lobby of the Spokane corporate building she had walked into as a 26-year-old, past coworkers who suddenly found their phones very interesting. The blazer still smelled faintly of her grandfather's pipe smoke. 28 years, and that was the detail her mind kept returning to. She didn't cry in the parking lot. She didn't cry when she got home and set the box on the kitchen counter next to a stack of unopened bills. She didn't cry that night, or the next, or the one after that. She just sat at her small dining table watching the numbers in her checking account drop the way leaves fall in October, slowly at first, then all at once. Severance ate her health insurance. Her father's final hospice bills ate the severance. The lawyer's fees from her divorce from Curtis 4 years earlier had already eaten everything before that. And every job application she submitted came back with the same polite poison. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." Other candidates. She knew what that meant when you were 54. They'd seen the year she graduated from college and decided she belonged to a museum. Her son Beckett lived 3 hours away in Seattle. 29 years old, married a year, working in tech. Sloane had texted him the day of the layoff. "Hey honey, got laid off today. Would love to hear your voice." He'd responded 4 days later with a thumbs-up emoji and a single sentence. "Sorry to hear, Mom. Crazy week here." That was the last she'd heard from him. She didn't blame him, not really. She had been so consumed caring for her father Dane in his final 2 years. The falls, the dementia, the long night drives to the ER, that she had let her son drift into a quiet stranger. Curtis had warned her about it during the divorce. "You give every piece of yourself to people who are leaving, Sloane. There won't be anything left for the people who want to stay." She'd hated him for saying it. She hated him more now that she suspected he might have been right. By March, the eviction notice was taped to her apartment door. By April, the truck was packed. What little was left of her life crammed into the bed of a 2009 Ford Ranger she'd inherited from her father, the only thing the lawyers and the hospice and the bank hadn't been able to take. She'd sold the wedding ring. She'd sold the engagement ring her grandmother Inga had passed down. She'd sold her mother's silver. She had $473 in her account, a quarter tank of gas, and an iron key on a leather cord that had been hanging from her rearview mirror for 26 years. She had never gone back to the cabin after Tate's funeral. The family had decided it wasn't worth the property taxes, wasn't worth the 4-hour drive into the Bitterroots, wasn't worth fighting over. Her Uncle Roy had walked the property once and called it a damn liability. The cabin had been left to the elements, to the bears, to the creeping years. But Sloane remembered. She remembered being 9, sitting on the front step in her grandfather's flannel jacket while he carved a wooden duck and told her, in that low gravel voice of his, that the cabin would always be there for her. Always, Sloaney. You hear me? When everything else fails, and it will, kiddo, the world's like that. This place will still be standing. I'll make sure of it. She had laughed then, the way 9-year-olds laugh at promises adults make. She wasn't laughing now. She pulled out of the apartment parking lot on a cold April morning, turned east toward the mountains, and drove into a sky the color of wet concrete. By the time she crossed into Montana, the rain had turned to snow. By the time she reached the foothills outside Ember Hollow, the storm was a full whiteout, the wipers fighting a losing war. The logging road was unmarked, but she found it the way you find an old prayer, by feel, not by sight. The truck climbed for 40 minutes through pines so heavy with snow they looked like they were kneeling. And then, at the last bend, through a curtain of falling white, she saw it. The cabin. And the door was already open. Sloane sat in the truck with her foot still pressed hard on the brake, the engine idling, snow ticking against the windshield in slow, deliberate taps. The cabin sat 50 yards ahead through the trees, exactly where she remembered it. The steep-pitched roof, the river-stone chimney her grandfather had laid by hand the summer she turned 7, the wide front porch where he'd taught her to clean a rifle. But the door, the heavy oak door with the iron hinges Tate had forged himself, was cracked open about a foot. And the chimney that had no business breathing, was exhaling a thin gray column of wood smoke into the falling snow. Her hands wouldn't move. Some part of her brain, the practical part she had used to manage claims files for nearly 3 decades, told her to put the truck in reverse. Drive back to Ember Hollow. Find the sheriff. Don't walk into a remote cabin where a stranger had clearly broken in and was clearly still inside. But another part of her, the part that had carried her through the last 2 years, simply refused to move. Because she had nowhere to reverse to. The apartment was gone. The job was gone. Her father was in the ground. Her mother had been gone since Sloane was 19, her grandparents longer than that. There was no sheriff's station that could solve what was wrong with her life. There was only this cabin and the $473 in her account. And if she turned around now, she didn't know what she would do tomorrow. So she sat. And while she sat, watching that thin gray smoke curl up into the white sky, the last 2 years played behind her eyes the way bad films play in empty theaters, whether anyone is watching or not. It had started with a phone call from a hospital in Coeur d'Alene. Her father had been found in his car in a grocery store parking lot, confused, unable to remember how he had gotten there. Early onset Lewy body dementia, the doctors said. Aggressive progression. He would need full-time care within a year. Sloane had 3 siblings, an older brother in Phoenix, a younger sister in Denver, and a half-sister in Florida she hadn't spoken to since their mother's funeral. Within 48 hours of the diagnosis, her brother had explained that his wife's MS made it impossible. Her sister had explained that the kids were in travel sports. Her half-sister had explained nothing, because she had simply stopped answering. By the end of that week, Sloane had taken a leave of absence from her job and driven the 4 hours to Coeur d'Alene to bring her father back to Spokane. She had told herself it would be 6 months, maybe a year. She had told herself she would be back at her desk by spring. Her father lasted 22 months. And during those 22 months, the life she had built piece by piece since her divorce came apart in ways she could not have predicted. Her supervisor, who had once been her ally, retired and was replaced by someone 15 years younger who looked at Sloane the way you look at a fax machine in a server room. Her leave got extended, then converted to part-time, then converted to we'll find a way to make it work, until one day there was no way to make it work. Her health declined under the weight of it, the broken sleep, the meals eaten standing up over the sink, the back injury from lifting her father out of the bathtub. Her social life dissolved. Friends called less than not at all, because Sloane could never commit to dinner, could never leave the house, could never give them anything but apologies. Curtis, her ex-husband, sent one card after the funeral. Inside, in his careful handwriting, "I'm sorry, Sloane, for all of it. She had thrown it away without responding. But the worst loss, the one she could not bring herself to name even now, was Beckett. Her son had been 26 when his grandfather got sick. He had a new job in Seattle, a new girlfriend who would later become his wife, a new life that was finally his own. And Sloane, exhausted, hollow-eyed, running on coffee and cortisol, had not been able to be his mother during those 22 months. She had missed his engagement dinner. She had missed his 30th birthday. She had Skyped into his wedding from her father's hospice room, holding the phone with one hand while she held her father's wrist with the other, and she had watched her only child get married through a 6-inch screen while her father moaned in his sleep beside her. Beckett had smiled at the camera. He had said the right things. But something had closed in his eyes that day, and it had never reopened. After the funeral, she had driven to Seattle to see him. They had eaten at a small Italian restaurant near his apartment. He had been polite, distant. He had asked, at one point, if she was finally going to come back to her own life now. She hadn't known how to answer. She had reached across the table for his hand, and he had reached for his water glass at the same moment, and neither of them had acknowledged it. That had been their last in-person conversation. 16 months ago, the snow fell heavier on the windshield. The smoke kept rising from the chimney that should have been cold. Sloane took a long, slow breath, the kind of breath you take before you do something you cannot undo. Then she turned off the engine, opened the truck door, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit her like a slap. Not the soft, romantic cold of Christmas movies, the real Montana kind, the kind that climbs into the seams of your jacket and announces itself in your lungs. Sloane pulled the iron key on its leather cord from beneath her sweater and gripped it in her fist as if it were a weapon. The leather was warm from her body. The key was not. She left the truck running. Some instinct told her to keep an escape route alive. She left the door cracked too, the cabin door of her own vehicle, mirroring the cabin door 50 yards ahead in some unconscious symmetry. The snow was already up to the tops of her boots. Each step toward the cabin made a soft, deliberate crunch, and every few feet she stopped and listened. No voices, no movement, just the wind moving through the pines and the faint, impossible smell of wood smoke. She paused at the edge of the porch. 26 years had passed since she had last stood on these boards, and yet some part of her body remembered them. Remembered the slight dip in the third step, the way the railing wobbled at the corner, the iron boot scraper her grandfather had hammered into the planks himself. The boot scraper was clean, recently used. She crouched and ran a finger along its edge. No rust, no mountain grime. Someone had been scraping their boots on it for years. That was when she noticed the rest. The porch was swept. The firewood was stacked under the eaves in tight, neat rows, the way Tate had always stacked it, bark side down, ends aligned, a small chopping block beside it with an axe sunk into the top. There was a coffee can on the railing with cigarette butts in it, but only 3, like someone who smoked rarely and carefully. The window glass was clean. The board she remembered being weathered to silver had been re-stained a deep walnut. The roof had been re-shingled, and not recently. The shingles were already weathered, but they were nowhere near 14 years old. Someone had been keeping this cabin alive. For years. Sloane stood up slowly, her breath fogging in the cold. Her Uncle Roy had walked this property a year after the funeral and called it a damn liability. Her family had stopped paying attention. The county records, the few times she had idly looked them up over the years, had still listed Tate Halvorsen as the owner of record because no one had bothered to settle the estate properly on a property no one wanted. So who, in the name of God, had been taking care of it? She stepped onto the porch. The boards didn't creak. They had been replaced, or at least reinforced. She approached the open door, her heart now thudding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Through the gap, she could see a sliver of the interior, a corner of the rough-hewn dining table, the edge of a wool rug, the warm orange flicker of a fire burning in the cast-iron stove against the far wall. The same cast-iron stove from the hook of her grandfather's letter. Don't open what's behind the stove until you've got nothing left to lose. She raised her fist and knocked once on the doorframe. Hello. Her voice came out smaller than she'd meant. She tried again, louder. Hello. I'm the granddaughter of Tate Halvorsen. This is my family's cabin. I need you to come out where I can see you. For a long moment, nothing. Just the pop of a pine, not in the stove, the distant whine of the wind. Then a man's voice, low and unhurried, came from somewhere deeper inside the cabin. Took you longer than he thought, Sloane. Come on in. Doors opened for a reason. Her knees nearly buckled. He had said her name. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, her fist still clenched around the iron key like a knife handle, and stepped inside. The cabin was warm. That was the first thing that hit her, a deep, wood-fire warmth that climbed into her bones and made her realize how cold she actually was. The second thing was the smell. Cedar, gun oil, coffee, and something else, something she hadn't smelled in 26 years. Pipe smoke. Cherry vanilla pipe smoke. The exact blend her grandfather had smoked his entire life. A man sat at the dining table at the far end of the room. He was big-boned and weathered, somewhere in his late 60s, with a thick gray beard and quiet, watchful eyes. He wore a faded green flannel and suspenders. There was a chipped enamel mug of coffee in front of him and a small brass bowl pipe resting in a tray. He was not holding a weapon. His hands were on the table where she could see them, palms down, deliberate. A man who had thought about how to look unthreatening to someone who would arrive scared. He didn't stand. He just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, somewhere between relief and grief. "My name is Reuben Osland," he said. "Your grandfather and I logged the Bitterroot together for 11 years before his back gave out. He saved my life in '78 when a widowmaker came down on a skid trail. I've owed him since." He paused, his eyes moving once over her face, the gray in her hair, the dark circles, the way she was still gripping that key. "He told me you'd come one day." He didn't say when. He just said I'd know. Sloane did not move from the doorway. Her fist was still wrapped around the iron key. The cold from outside was rolling in around her boots, pushing against the warmth of the cabin like two weather systems meeting in her own body. "You knew my grandfather," she said. It wasn't a question. It was something closer to a test, a single brick laid down to see if it would hold weight. Reuben nodded slowly. "Knew him better than most. Worked beside him 11 years. Buried him too. I was one of the 6 who carried him. You probably don't remember. You were 28, standing by the church door in a gray coat, holding a man's hand who didn't deserve to be holding yours. Curtis." She felt the air go out of her chest. He had remembered Curtis. He had been at the funeral. She had been so deep in her grief that day she hadn't seen anyone clearly, hadn't registered faces, hadn't done much more than nod through a fog of black coats and casseroles. But this stranger had seen her, had been watching her even then. "Sit down before you fall down, Sloane," Reuben said. He gestured to the chair across from him with one weathered hand. "There's coffee on the stove. I'll pour you a cup, and then I'll tell you what I came here to tell you. You can keep the key in your hand if it makes you feel safer. I won't ask you to put it down." She sat. Her legs were shaking, and she was honest enough with herself to admit it wasn't only from the cold. Reuben rose slowly. He was a tall man, but he moved with the careful economy of someone whose body had been broken and rebuilt more than once, and walked to the stove. He poured coffee from a blue enamel pot into a chipped mug and set it in front of her. He did not push it toward her. He set it down and stepped back, giving her room. "He started getting sick the spring of 2010, Reuben began, lowering himself back into his chair. Doctor in Hamilton told him it was his heart. He didn't tell anyone in the family. Didn't tell your father. Didn't tell your aunt. He drove out to my place one Sunday evening with a bottle of bourbon and a folder. Sat at my kitchen table. Said, 'Reuben, I'm calling in everything I'm owed, and I'm calling it in for one reason only.' Then he opened the folder and showed me a picture of you." Sloane felt something prickle behind her eyes. She didn't trust her voice yet, so she said nothing. Said you were the one. Said your father was already a soft man and would only get softer. Said your Uncle Roy was a fool with a checkbook. Said your brother and sisters had the family's pride, but not its spine. He said, 'Reuben, my Sloane has the spine. She's just going to spend her whole damn life giving it to other people, and one day there'll be nothing left of her, and that's the day she'll come up that road.'" Reuben paused. He picked up his pipe, turned it in his fingers, set it down without lighting it. "He asked me to keep this place alive until that day came. Pay the taxes out of an account he'd set up. Reshingle the roof when it needed it. Replace the porch boards. Keep the stove drawing. Keep the well from freezing. Keep the locks oiled. Keep everything ready. For 14 years, Sloane whispered. For 14 years, Reuben said. He died 9 months after that conversation. I've been coming up here 4 times a month ever since. Sometimes a week at a stretch in the summer to do bigger work. The county thinks I'm a caretaker hired by an estate. The estate thinks I'm volunteer family. The truth is your grandfather paid me $1 a year out of that account. On a contract he wrote himself on a piece of legal paper, and I've cashed every one of those dollars. He reached into the breast pocket of his flannel and pulled out a small folded square of paper. He slid it across the table toward her. She unfolded it with hands that were no longer steady. It was a photocopy of a check dated December of last year, made out to Reuben Ostlund in the amount of $1, signed in her grandfather's unmistakable handwriting from beyond the grave, a stack of post-dated checks, evidently, that the bank had been releasing one a year. He set it up so it would run for 20 years, Reuben said quietly. We're at year 14. I was starting to wonder if you'd come at all. There were a couple of times I thought maybe I'd misjudged it. Maybe you'd already given up. But then last week I got a letter from the bank. Said the trust was being reviewed because of a flagged address change on your driver's license. Spokane to a forwarding box. Bank's required to alert the trustee. And I'm the trustee. He almost smiled. Tate even thought of that. Told me, when her address starts moving, that means she's running. Light the stove. She'll be there inside the month. Sloane was crying now, silently, the kind of crying that happens before you realize it's happening. She lifted the chipped mug to her lips. The coffee was bitter and hot, and exactly the kind of coffee her grandfather used to make. Cowboy coffee, he called it. Strong enough to walk to town on its own, kid. She set the mug down and pressed her palms flat against the worn pine of the table to steady herself. There's more, Reuben said. A lot more. But you're shaking. Eat first. We'll talk again tomorrow. She did not remember falling asleep. She remembered Reuben setting a bowl of elk stew in front of her, and the steam rising into her face, and the way her hand shook on the spoon. She remembered him saying, without looking at her, bedroom upstairs on the right, into the hall. Bed's made. I changed the sheets 2 weeks ago. She remembered climbing the narrow stairs with her boots still on and not having the energy to take them off, and falling face first onto a quilt that smelled of cedar and lavender. After that, there was nothing. Just a long, deep, dreamless dark, the first real sleep she had slept in 2 years. When she opened her eyes, sunlight was coming through the window in pale yellow bars. The storm had passed. The room was small and clean, with a sloped ceiling and a single dormer that looked out into a forest of snow-laden pines. A folded stack of clothing sat on a wooden chair beside the bed. Flannel shirts, thick wool socks, a knit cap, all of them clearly her grandmother Inga's, with a note pinned to the top in handwriting she didn't know. These were Inga's. He kept them in the cedar chest. They'll fit you. Coffee's downstairs. Sloane sat up slowly. Her body ached the way bodies ache when they have finally been allowed to stop running. She pulled on one of her grandmother's flannel shirts over her own and went down the stairs in her socks. The cabin in daylight was a different cabin entirely. The morning sun lit up details she hadn't been able to see the night before. The hand-carved wooden ducks on the mantel, the elk antlers above the door, the wall of black and white photographs near the staircase. The fire in the cast-iron stove was still going, low and patient. A fresh pot of coffee sat on the back burner. There was a note on the table. Gone to check the trap line and feed the chickens. Yes, there are chickens. Coop is around back. Eggs in the basket on the counter. Take your time today. Walk the cabin. Look at everything. We'll talk tonight. Chickens. Her grandfather's cabin had chickens. Sloane laughed once, a small, startled sound, and then she pressed her hand over her mouth because she had not heard herself laugh in longer than she could remember. She poured a mug of coffee and walked the cabin slowly, the way you walk a museum the first time, careful, reverent, not yet sure what you were allowed to touch. The wall of photographs was the first thing that broke her. There were dozens of them, hung in a careful grid, framed in simple black wood. Her grandmother as a young woman in a gingham dress, leaning against a Studebaker. Her father Dane as a boy, holding up a brook trout almost as long as his arm. Her Uncle Roy, at 12, looking already disappointed in something. And then, taking up the largest portion of the wall, Sloane. A photograph of her at 6 on this very porch, hair in pigtails, missing 2 front teeth. A photograph of her at 9 in her grandfather's flannel jacket, the same jacket, the one she could almost feel against her skin even now. A photograph of her at 16, sullen, arms crossed, refusing to smile for the camera the summer her parents had nearly divorced. A photograph of her at 22, holding a newborn Beckett in this very cabin, both of them swaddled in a wool blanket. She had forgotten she had ever brought Beckett here. She had forgotten the entire visit. But there it was, hanging on a wall in the mountains of Montana, evidence that she had once been a young mother with a baby and a future. There were no photographs of her brother, none of her sisters, none of her Uncle Roy past the age of 12. The wall was a wall about her, about Sloane, as if her grandfather had been quietly building a shrine to one specific grandchild for 40 years and had simply never told anyone he was doing it. She moved on because she had to. She didn't trust herself to stand at that wall any longer. The kitchen was small but stocked. The pantry had jars of preserves with handwritten labels in Reuben's blocky print. Huckleberry jam, 23. Pickled beets, 24. Elk jerky, 24. The flour bin was full. The salt was new. There was a bag of coffee beans, fresh enough that the seal was unbroken. Whoever had been preparing this cabin had been preparing it for someone to actually live in, not just a visit. She found her grandfather's reading chair beside the stove, a deep leather thing cracked along the seams. On the small table beside it, beneath a kerosene lamp, sat a leather-bound journal. Plain, worn. Tate's handwriting on the cover in faded ink for Sloane. When you're ready. She sat down in the chair. The leather sighed under her like an old friend recognizing her weight. She opened the journal slowly. The first page had a single line, written in the careful, deliberate hand she remembered from birthday cards. Sloane, if you're reading this, I was right. I'm sorry I was right. I try not to be. She closed the journal, pressed her forehead against the cover. And for the first time since the cardboard box, since the eviction, since the funeral, since the divorce, since Beckett's silent wedding screen, Sloane Marchetti let herself cry. Real, full-body crying. The kind that breaks something open inside you. The kind that lets light in. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She read the journal that morning until the coffee in her mug went cold. She read it again that afternoon by the stove with a fresh mug. By the time the light started to fail and Reuben came stomping back onto the porch with snow on his boots and a basket of eggs in his hand, Sloane had read the entire first section twice, and her understanding of her own life had been quietly rearranged from the foundation up. The journal was not a diary. It was a record. Tate had been writing in it on and off for nearly 40 years, and almost every entry was about her. Notes from her childhood visits. Things she had said at 6, at 9, at 14. Observations he had made about her temperament. The day she had cried over a wounded sparrow at the creek. The day she had refused to let her cousin Roy Jr. shoot a doe because the doe had a fawn. The summer she was 17 and had told Tate she was thinking of becoming a social worker, and he had written underneath, in his careful hand, "She's already a social worker. She's been one since she was 6. The world will mistake this for weakness. It is not weakness. It is the most dangerous kind of strength, because the people who have it almost always destroy themselves, protecting people who don't deserve them." She had read that line 4 times. There were entries about her marriage to Curtis. Tate had only met him twice, but he had written, after the second meeting, he's not a bad man. He's a small one. She'll outgrow him in 15 years, and he'll never forgive her for it. Tate had died before the divorce. He had also been right by 12 months. There were entries about her father Dane, written in a tone Sloane had never heard her grandfather use aloud. Disappointed, weary, almost mournful. "My son is a kind man with no backbone. When I am gone, he will not protect her. He will lean on her. The whole family will lean on her. They will lean and lean until she falls, because that's what families do to the one strong person inside them. They use her up and call it love. She set the journal down on her lap and stared into the fire for a long time. Reuben let her sit. He moved around the kitchen behind her, frying eggs and slicing thick brown bread, the smell filling the cabin in slow waves. He didn't ask what she had read. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just put a plate in her hands when it was ready, sat down in the chair across from her, and ate his own dinner in companionable silence. When the plates were empty, he finally spoke. He left you more than the journal. I figured. Tomorrow morning, if you're up to it, I want to show you the back workshop. Not the lean-to off the porch, the one behind it. The real one. He kept it locked. Even I never had a key for it. He told me on his deathbed where the key was hidden, and he made me swear I wouldn't open the door myself. Said it was yours to open. Sloane felt something shift in her chest. Where's the key? Reuben tilted his head toward the wall of photographs. Behind a picture of you at 9. Tape on the back of the frame. She rose without speaking. Crossed the room. Lifted the photograph of 9-year-old Sloane in her grandfather's flannel jacket off its nail. Turned it over. There, taped to the back of the wooden frame with a strip of yellow masking tape, was a small brass key. She did not wait until morning. Reuben did not try to stop her. He simply got up, pulled on his coat, lit a kerosene lantern, and followed her out the back door into the cold blue twilight. The workshop was 40 paces behind the cabin, set against a low ridge of granite. It looked like a tool shed, small, weathered, the kind of structure you would walk past without seeing. But the door was solid oak, the lock was newer than the wood, and when Sloane slid the brass key into it, the bolt turned with a smoothness that told her the mechanism had been kept oiled for a very long time. The door swung open. Reuben raised the lantern. It was not a tool shed. The interior was twice the size the exterior had suggested. Tate had built it back into the hill, into the granite itself. Workbenches lined 3 walls. Hand tools hung on pegboards in perfect order. A small forge sat cold in one corner. But what stopped Sloane in the doorway was the rest. Rifles. Custom rifles. Maybe 20 of them, racked along the back wall, each one a piece of art. Hand-checkered walnut stocks, hand-engraved receivers, scopes mounted with brass. Beneath them, a long cabinet of custom hunting knives, the handles carved from antler and burl. Above the workbench, a logbook the size of a family Bible. Reuben set the lantern on the bench. Your grandfather was a gunsmith and a knife maker for 43 years. The family thought he was just a logger who whittled in the evenings. He was selling these to collectors in Wyoming, Texas, Alaska. Some of them go for $15,000, $20,000 apiece. The logbook will show you the orders. The royalties on his patented stock design still come in monthly. They've been piling up in the trust for 14 years. Sloane, he stopped, cleared his throat. There's enough in that account to never need a job again. And what's in here is only the beginning. Sloane did not sleep that night. She sat on the floor of the workshop in her grandmother's flannel shirt with a logbook open across her knees and a kerosene lantern at her elbow, and she read every entry from 1981 to 2010. 43 years of orders. 43 years of rifle stocks shipped to ranches in Wyoming, knives carried to outfitters in Alaska, custom-engraved receivers commissioned by men whose names she recognized from magazines she had seen in airport bookstores. The numbers in the right-hand column climbed from 3 figures to 4 to 5 over the decades. By the time she reached the final pages, where her grandfather's handwriting had begun to shake with the heart disease he had kept hidden, the orders were going for $12,000, $15,000, $18,000 apiece. Reuben had gone to bed hours earlier. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional pop of a pine, not in the stove inside. The wind had stopped. The world outside the small window of the workshop was the kind of black you only get in mountains in winter, a black so complete it felt like a hell breath. When she finally closed the logbook, dawn was beginning to gray the eastern sky. Her back ached. Her eyes burned. But something inside her had begun to lift, slowly, the way fog lifts off a lake at sunrise. Not all at once, but in layers, in patches, in pieces. She walked back to the cabin through snow that crunched like sugar. Inside, the stove was glowing. Reuben was still asleep, snoring softly in the small bedroom off the kitchen that had once been a pantry. She moved past him on quiet feet. There was one thing left. Don't open what's behind the stove until you've got nothing left to lose. She had nothing left to lose. She had known that since the cardboard box. She had known it since the eviction notice. She had known at the moment she turned the truck onto the logging road. But she also understood, now, sitting in the dawn light of the cabin her grandfather had built and protected and waited inside for her across 14 years of his own death, that she had been wrong about what that sentence meant. She had thought nothing left to lose meant rock bottom. It did not. It meant something stranger and more precise. It meant the moment you finally stopped being owned by what you were afraid to lose. It meant the moment your hands were finally free. Her hands were free. She crossed to the cast iron stove. It was massive, black, sitting on a slab of fieldstone her grandfather had laid himself. She had assumed, when she read the letter in the truck, that behind the stove was a metaphor, that she would find a hidden compartment in the wall. But Tate had never been a metaphorical man. She knelt beside the stove and ran her fingers along the fieldstone slab beneath it. The slab moved. Not all of it, just the front portion, where her fingers found a deliberate seam she would never have noticed if she hadn't been looking. She pried it up with both hands. It was hinged. It was in fact a small trapdoor disguised as a hearthstone, and beneath it was a steel box set into the floor like a safe. The box was not locked. Tate had not wanted her to need another key. He had wanted her to need only the patience to have come this far. She lifted the lid. There were 3 things inside. The first was a thick manila envelope of legal documents, deeds, trusts, mineral rights claims for 42 acres along a creek that had been quietly producing low-yield gold and silver for decades, held in a private claim Tate had filed in 1979 under a corporate name no one in the family had ever heard of. There was a current statement from a small investment firm in Helena. The trust held over $400,000 in cash. The mineral rights were appraised separately and conservatively at twice that. The second was a small velvet pouch. Sloane opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was her grandmother Inga's wedding ring. The real one, the one Sloane had grown up believing had been buried with her. It had been replaced in the casket, evidently with a replica. The original had been waiting here, in this box, in this floor for her. The third was a letter, sealed, with her name on it in her grandfather's handwriting. She broke the seal. Sloane, if you've gotten this far, you've already done the hardest part, which was surviving long enough to read this. I'm proud of you. I was always proud of you, but I'm prouder now because I know what it cost. The money is yours. The land is yours. The cabin is yours. None of it is in your father's name, your uncle's name, your siblings' names, or your son's name. Only yours. I built it that way on purpose. They cannot touch it. They cannot guilt it out of you. They cannot ask for just a little help until the well is dry. If they try, you tell them their grandfather said no on your behalf 40 years ago. But here's the harder part, kid. Money won't fix what's broken in you. You know that. You've watched it not fix people your whole life. What this is a door. You decide what you walk through it toward. Call your son. He's been waiting longer than you think. Tate. Sloane folded the letter against her chest and bowed her head. She called Beckett on a Sunday afternoon in late June, 11 weeks after she had walked into the cabin. She had thought about it every day since reading her grandfather's letter, and she had not been able to do it once. Every time she picked up the phone, she rehearsed the wrong sentence or imagined the wrong silence on the other end, or felt the old shame rise in her throat like a hand closing. So she waited. She let the cabin do its work on her. She split firewood until her shoulders were strong again. She learned to feed the chickens, to candle the eggs, to bake bread in the cast iron stove. She walked the property with Reuben and learned where the property lines ran, where the creek bent, where the old gold claim sat under 50 feet of granite and pine. She let her hair go gray without dyeing it. She slept 8 hours a night. She read her grandfather's journal until she could hear his voice in the silences. And then, on a Sunday in June, she sat on the front porch with a glass of iced tea and her phone in her lap, and she called her son. He answered on the third ring. Mom. Hi, honey. There was a long pause. She could hear traffic in the background, the hum of a city Sunday. She could hear him breathing. Where are you? He asked. His voice was careful. I tried your apartment. The number's disconnected. I tried your old work email. It bounced. I called Aunt Rita. She said you disappeared. I didn't know if he stopped. She heard him swallow. I didn't know if you were okay. She closed her eyes. I'm okay, Beckett. Where are you? I'm at Grandpa Tate's cabin. In Montana. The hunting cabin. Do you remember it? Another pause. Longer this time. I remember it, he said. There was a wall of ducks. I was little. You were holding me. I remember Grandma Inga's quilts on the bed. I thought I dreamed it. You didn't dream it. You were too. We were there for 9 days. You made me promise I'd bring you back when you were older. I never did. She drew a slow breath. I'm sorry, honey. I'm sorry for a lot of things. I'm sorry I missed your wedding from a hospice room. I'm sorry I missed your 30th birthday. I'm sorry I let myself disappear into Grandpa Dane's last years until I disappeared from you too. I don't expect you to forgive any of it. I just need to say it out loud because I don't want to die without having said it. She heard him exhale. It was the kind of exhale she used to hear when he was a small boy and finally stopped fighting sleep. Mom, can I come see you? She put a hand over her mouth. Yes, she said. Please. He came the following weekend. He flew into Missoula, rented a car, drove the 4 hours into the Bitterroots, and pulled up to the cabin in the long blue evening of a Friday in late June. He stepped out of the car, taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders, with the beginnings of gray in his beard. He looked, in that first instant, exactly like her father, and then, in the second instant, exactly like her grandfather, and then, finally, exactly like himself, her son, her boy, the only person in the world she had made. He hugged her on the porch for a long time. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. He stayed 9 days. The same 9 days she had spent there with him as a baby. She did not point this out, but she suspected, watching him scrape his boots on Tate's iron scraper on his last morning, that he had counted them too. By the end of that summer, Sloane had quietly done 3 things. The first was hire a lawyer in Helena and put the cabin and the surrounding 60 acres in a trust under her own name and Beckett's, with provisions that no other relative could ever attach a claim to it. Tate had built the wall. She was reinforcing it. The second was reach out to Reuben's wife, who had been a widow's mile from her husband's quiet absences for 14 years, and offer her a stipend from the trust as a long overdue thank you. Reuben tried to refuse. His wife did not. The third was the thing that would matter most. Sloane founded the Halvorson Hearth Project in late September. It was small at first, just her a website and a 1-page mission statement. The Hearth Project was for women over 50 who had been laid off, divorced, widowed, or worn down by years of caretaking. It paid emergency rent. It funded retraining. It connected women to lawyers, to therapists, to each other. Every woman who applied received a handwritten letter. Every letter ended the same way. You're not finished. You're between things. There is a door you have not walked through yet. Walk through it. By the second year, the Hearth Project had helped 147 women. By the fifth, it had helped over 1,000. Sloane lived in the cabin year-round now. Beckett visited every summer with his wife and, eventually, a small dark-haired daughter who scraped her boots on the iron scraper without being told. Reuben still came by for coffee. The wall of photographs grew. A new one went up beside the picture of 9-year-old Sloane, a 4-year-old girl in her great-great-grandfather's flannel jacket, the same jacket, missing 2 front teeth, laughing at something off camera. Some doors, when you walk through them, stay open behind you. Some doors are meant to. Tate had known. He had always known. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.